She had not been back to Millhaven in 11 years, and she might never have returned at all if her mother hadn't left a voicemail saying the old house on Creekside Road had finally sold. Dr. Alison Mercer pulled off the highway just past the county line and sat there for a moment with the engine running. The GPS said 14 minutes. 14 minutes to a place she had spent a decade trying to outgrow. She wasn't there for the house. She was there for the grave. Her father, Robert Mercer, had died the previous March. A quiet death, the kind that happened while his daughter was in the middle of a 14-hour shift at St. Augustine Medical Center in Philadelphia. The kind where the phone rings and you already know before you answer. She had flown home for the service, stood in her black coat in the cold, shook hands with people she didn't recognize, and flown back 48 hours later. She had told herself she would return when it wasn't so raw. She had told herself a lot of things. Now it was October. The leaves on the oaks along Route 9 had gone the color of old rust, and the air smelled the way Millhaven always smelled in fall. Wood smoke and something damp and sweet underneath, like the town itself was composting slowly. Alison pulled back onto the road. Calvary Lutheran Cemetery was on the east side of town, past the grain elevator and the old Tasty Freeze that had been a nail salon the last time she checked. The gates were open. They were always open. Millhaven wasn't the kind of place where people worried about that sort of thing. She found her father's plot without trouble. Robert James Mercer, beloved husband and father. The stone was modest gray granite. Her mother had chosen it. Alison had not been consulted, and she had pretended not to mind. She knelt down and pulled a few weeds away from the base of the stone, more for something to do with her hands than anything else. She had brought no flowers. She wasn't sure why. It had seemed important not to be performative about it. She had driven 4 hours, and she couldn't explain to herself exactly why, except that there was something unfinished here. Something she hadn't known how to name. That was when she heard him. Not loud. Not crying the way people cried in movies. It was quieter than that. The kind of sound a person makes when they think they are completely alone and have stopped caring about the sound they're making. A low, ragged exhale, almost a moan. Coming from 2 rows over, Alison stood slowly. The man was sitting on the ground beside a grave, his back to her, his shoulders curved forward like he was trying to make himself smaller. He was a large man. She could see that even from behind, broad across the back, wearing a canvas jacket that had seen better decades. One hand was pressed flat against the face of the headstone. His other hand was in his lap, holding a photograph so worn it had gone soft at the edges. She almost turned away. A person's grief was their own. She knew that better than most. But something stopped her. The name on the stone he was sitting in front of, she could read it from where she stood. Robert James Mercer, her father's grave. Alison did not move for a long moment. She simply stood there in the October air, watching this stranger grieve over her father's stone, and felt something cold and quiet settle into her chest that was not quite anger and not quite fear, but was something in between. She said, "Excuse me." The man turned so fast he almost fell. He scrambled to his feet, all 6'2" of him, and the photograph fluttered to the grass. He grabbed for it instinctively, clutching it to his chest, and then looked at her with red-rimmed eyes and an expression that cycled through 3 or 4 emotions in about 2 seconds. "I'm sorry," he said immediately. "I didn't. I'll go." "Don't go," Alison said. She was surprised by her own voice. It came out steady. "Tell me who you are." He was somewhere in his mid-40s, she guessed. Dark-skinned, heavyset, with close-cropped gray at his temples that hadn't been there long. He had the kind of face that was built for smiling, wide jaw, deep-set eyes, but it wasn't smiling now. He looked like a man who had been caught doing something he wasn't sure he had the right to do. "My name is Curtis Bowen," he said. "I knew your father." Alison looked at him. "I'm his daughter." Something moved across Curtis Bowen's face then, something complicated. He nodded slowly, like he had suspected as much, like he had maybe hoped and feared it at the same time. "He talked about you," Curtis said. "Dr. Mercer, Alison, he was proud of you. He said it every time I saw him." Alison did not know what to do with that. Her father had not been a man who said things like that easily, not to her face anyway. She had grown up in the particular silence of a man who expressed love through action and had never quite learned the words. "He never mentioned you," she said. She didn't mean it as an accusation. Curtis looked at the grave. "No," he said. "I don't think he would have." The wind moved through the trees at the edge of the cemetery. Somewhere across town, a dog was barking. "Will you sit with me?" Curtis asked. "Just for a little while. I think there are things you ought to know." They sat on the bench near the maintenance shed, the one with the peeling green paint that the cemetery had been meaning to replace for 20 years. Curtis held the photograph in both hands, but didn't look at it. He looked at the middle distance, the way people did when they were organizing something they'd never had to say out loud before. He had grown up in Millhaven, he said. Born here, raised here, couldn't seem to leave even when he tried. His mother had worked the counter at the pharmacy on 4th Street for 30 years. His father had not been in the picture, not from the start, not ever. Curtis had understood that early and quietly in the way children do. He had gotten into trouble at 17. Not the worst kind of trouble, but enough. A fight outside the Sunoco station that had left a boy with a broken nose and Curtis with a court date. His mother had sat in the front row of that courtroom and stared at her hands the entire time. That image had never left him. The judge had offered him a choice. 2 years supervised probation, community service hours, and mandatory enrollment in the county's workforce training program. Curtis had taken it because he had no other option. The workforce training program met on Tuesday and Thursday evenings in the basement of the public library. It was run at that time by a rotating cast of local volunteers who taught things like how to write a resume, how to speak to an employer, how to manage a checking account. Curtis had shown up that first Tuesday expecting nothing. He was 17 and furious, and he sat in the back row with his arms crossed. The man who ran the session that night had introduced himself as Bob Mercer. Curtis smiled faintly at the grass. He walked in carrying a briefcase and wearing a tie. I thought, okay, here we go. Another guy who drives home to his nice house afterward and feels good about himself. He paused. He wasn't like that. Robert Mercer had been, at the time, the manager of the Millhaven branch of First County Bank. He had been doing these volunteer sessions for 6 years. He had a quiet way of talking that didn't sound like lecturing. He asked questions more than he gave answers. He had looked at 17-year-old Curtis Bowen in the back row with his arms crossed and had not treated him like a problem to be solved. He had treated him like a person who hadn't figured out his own value yet. "He asked me what I was good at," Curtis said. "Not what I wanted to be, not where I saw myself in 10 years. Just, what are you good at right now today?" And I didn't have an answer because nobody had ever asked me that before. He turned the photograph over in his hands. I thought about it for 3 days. I came back the next Thursday and I told him I'm good at fixing things, engines, anything mechanical, my uncle showed me. Robert Mercer had written something in a small notebook. He had asked Curtis 3 more questions. At the end of the session, he had handed Curtis a business card and said there was a man named Harwell out on Route 12 who ran an auto repair shop and was looking for a serious young person to apprentice. He said he'd already spoken to Harwell about it. All Curtis had to do was show up Monday morning and not be late. Curtis had almost not gone. He had stood in front of the mirror Monday morning and told himself it was going to be nothing. It was going to be a waste of time. This was how people like Robert Mercer made themselves feel useful. He had gone anyway because his mother was awake at 6 a.m., making him breakfast, and he could not stand the look on her face if he didn't. He showed up at Harwell's Auto on Route 12 at 7:58. He was still there now, except that 6 years ago, when old Harwell had retired, Curtis had bought the shop. Alison looked at him. "Been mine since 2018, Curtis said. Got a loan from First County Bank, actually. Different manager by then, but still," he almost smiled. "Your father co-signed." The cold thing in Alison's chest had changed into something else. She couldn't identify it exactly. It was adjacent to grief, but it wasn't grief. It was the feeling of discovering a room in a house you thought you knew. "He never told me," she said. "It came out smaller than she intended." "He wouldn't," Curtis said. "That wasn't how he was." "He told me once. This was years later, after I had the shop. He said, 'Curtis, the help doesn't belong to me anymore once I give it. It belongs to you. That's the whole point.'" The sun had shifted. It was past 2 in the afternoon. Alison had not eaten since 6 a.m., but she wasn't hungry. She was leaning forward with her elbows on her knees, listening. Curtis had stayed in touch with Robert Mercer over the years, not constantly, not formally. They would run into each other at the Kroger or at the hardware store on Clement Street, And they would talk for 10 or 15 minutes, the way people did in small towns, easy and unhurried. Occasionally, Curtis would stop by the bank with a question about a business decision, and Robert would take him into his office and close the door and talk it through with him seriously, the way he would talk to any adult with a real question. He had been at the funeral last March. He had stood in the back. Alison tried to remember the faces at the funeral and couldn't. She had been running on no sleep and the particular anesthesia of shock, moving through the day like she was watching it from slightly outside herself. "I have a son," Curtis said. He had been building toward this, she realized. The whole story had been building toward this. He's 9. His name is Marcus. Wait, no. He stopped himself. Something flickered across his face. "His name is Benjamin. I always do that. I had a dog named Marcus for 12 years, and I swear I still almost say it." He shook his head. "Benjamin. Ben. His mother and I weren't together long, but we do okay. We co-parent. He's with me every other week." He reached into the breast pocket of his canvas jacket and carefully unfolded the photograph. He held it out to Alison. It was a child's drawing, she realized, not a photograph at all. It had been folded and unfolded enough times that the paper had gone soft as cloth, a crayon drawing on white construction paper. Stick figures of varying heights, the kind a 9-year-old drew when he was trying to include everyone important. There were 4 figures. One was labeled Dodd in large, unsteady letters. One was labeled Ben, one was labeled Grandma. The 4th figure, tallest of all, standing in the center, had 2 words written above it in blue crayon. "Mr. Bob." Alison pressed her fingers against her mouth. "He drew it a couple weeks after your father died," Curtis said quietly. He had met him a few times at the shop. "Your dad used to come in for his oil changes, and Ben was there sometimes after school doing homework at my desk. They talked. I don't even know about what. Baseball, maybe. Ben likes baseball." He refolded the drawing carefully. "Ben came home from school one day in April and drew this and said, 'Dad, I want to put this somewhere important, so I've been carrying it.'" Alison realized her eyes were burning. She looked at the sky for a moment, at the thin October clouds moving over the tree line. "Why were you crying?" she asked. "Just now at the grave. Was it grief, or was there something else?" Curtis was quiet for a moment. He looked at his hands. "I've been trying to tell Ben about gratitude," he said. "Not the word, the thing. You know how you try to explain something to a kid and you realize you don't fully understand it yourself until you hear yourself say it?" He paused. "I've been thinking about what I owe. Not like debt, not like a transaction. More like, I want my son to understand that there are people in this world who do things for you quietly, who don't need you to know it was hard, who just do it and then go on with their day. And I want him to understand that when you're the recipient of that, you carry it. It becomes part of you. It changes what you do next." He looked at the grave across the grass. "I was trying to figure out how to explain that to a 9-year-old, and I came here because this felt like the right place to think about it. And then he stopped. I sat down and I couldn't get back up for a while." Alison nodded. She didn't trust her voice. The wind moved through the cemetery again, and a handful of brown leaves skittered across the path. She walked back to her father's grave after Curtis left. He had offered to go first, and she had said yes without quite knowing why, and she had watched him fold himself back into an old blue pickup truck and pull slowly out through the cemetery gates. She stood in front of the gray granite stone for a long time. Robert James Mercer, beloved husband and father. She thought about all the Tuesday and Thursday evenings her father had driven to the public library. She would have been in middle school then, in high school. She had known he volunteered somewhere. She had not asked where. She had been too busy being 12, being 15, being 17 and furious at the world in the way only 17-year-olds could be. She thought about the bank office with the door closed, the small notebook. The business card passed across a table in the basement of a library to a boy who had his arms crossed and expected nothing. She thought about a 9-year-old named Benjamin who drew his family and included a man from an auto shop in it, because that man had talked to him about baseball after school, and apparently that was enough to matter. She pulled her phone from her coat pocket. She did not call anyone. She opened her notes app and typed a single line. Dad co-signed a loan for a man he met at the library in 1999. That man owns a business now. That man has a son. She stared at it. Then she typed, "What am I doing with my Tuesdays?" She put her phone away. She had left Millhaven at 18 with a single-minded intention to become someone, to build something. She had done it. She had the degrees and the salary and the apartment in Philadelphia with the good light in the mornings. She had the career her father had bragged about to a stranger at a grave. She had not thought very carefully about the Tuesdays. There was a medical school residency program at the community hospital in Garfield County, 40 minutes from Millhaven. She knew the program director slightly, had met her at a conference in Baltimore 2 years ago. It was a rural health program, underfunded and perpetually short on experienced mentors. Alison had received an email from them last spring asking if she would consider consulting. She had flagged the email to deal with later and had not thought about it since. She walked back to her car. She sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine for several minutes. Then she found the email. It had taken some scrolling, but there it was, still flagged, and she wrote a reply, short, professional. She said she was interested in discussing the mentorship opportunity and asked if the program director had availability to speak in the next 2 weeks. She sent it before she could talk herself out of it. The drive back to Philadelphia was 4 hours. She stopped once for coffee at a rest area outside of Harrisburg, and while she stood at the counter waiting, she thought about what Curtis had said. About how he wanted his son to understand that when you receive something quiet and real, you carry it. It becomes part of you. It changes what you do next. Her father had never been good at saying things. He had been very good at doing them. She had spent most of her adult life becoming accomplished. She had spent less time, she realized, becoming useful in the way her father had been useful. Not the titled, compensated, credentialed kind of useful. The Tuesday evening kind. By the time she crossed back into Pennsylvania, the program director had already replied. Yes, she would love to speak. She had Thursday mornings free. The following spring, a first-year resident named Yolanda Ferris sat across from Alison in a cramped office at Garfield County Community Hospital and said she was thinking about quitting. She was from Roanoke, she said. She had come here because she believed in rural health access, but she was drowning in the caseload and she hadn't slept more than 5 hours in 4 days, and she didn't know if she was cut out for this. Alison listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't offer a pep talk or a list of coping strategies. She asked, "What made you choose medicine, not the program, not the specialty? You specifically, why medicine?" Yolanda thought about it for a moment. "My grandmother," she said. She lived in a county with no hospital. She drove 45 minutes to a clinic that was only open 3 days a week. She died of something that was completely treatable. Alison nodded. "Tell me about your grandmother." Yolanda talked for 20 minutes. Alison said very little. At the end of it, Yolanda looked slightly different. Not fixed, not okay, but something. Like a person who had remembered why they came. "You're going to be excellent," Alison told her. "Not yet, but you will be." Yolanda finished her residency 14 months later. She accepted a position at the Garfield County Clinic. She did not quit. Alison never told her about Curtis Bowen, or about a gray granite headstone in a small cemetery in Millhaven, or about a drawing in crayon that a man had been carrying in his breast pocket. Those things belonged to Alison now, and they were not for her to give away. That was how it worked. Her father had told her that through a stranger at a grave. "The help doesn't belong to me once I give it. It belongs to you. That's the whole point." And the point, she understood now, was not the gesture. The point was what you did next. There are people in your life. Maybe you don't know their names yet. Maybe you've already passed them in a hallway and never thought twice, who are quietly holding open a door that they didn't have to open. And the only thing they ask, the only real thing, is that someday you find a door of your own and hold it. Robert Mercer knew that. He just never said it out loud. He didn't have to.